Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy. On this week's show, we have Jeremy Miller. He has credits on Dungeons & Dragons, Rings of Power, World of Mickey, and many more. Enjoy. First and foremost, I want to thank you for being here.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Sure. It's my house, so it was easy.
We've known each other a very long time, so it's good to finally get you on the show.
Yeah, I was thinking about it last night. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, because it was probably I want to say it was like 15 years, something like that.
I don't want to know the number, but it was somewhere close to that.
It's been a while.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to start by going over your backstory. If you could kind of share how you got started, what led you to engineering, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I like all of us that are into this, I just love music from like immediately, like before I could talk, I just loved music.
Yeah.
So it was, I would listen to my dad's Pink Floyd records on his hi-fi system.
Nice.
He said a combination of words that I still remember to this day, and I was like 5. We're riding in the car, and I'm just going to move that there. He says, "Do you want to hear a song that sounds like a spaceship?"
What?
Right. And like, yeah. It's like the most amazing thing you could ever say to a 5-year-old in the 1980s. So,
nice.
That was Dark Side of the Moon, and it like really primed me for this like idea of music being more than just like instruments.
Right. Yeah.
So I was just like really fascinated by, I would just like obsessively listen to these records all the time. Everyone our age, I think, when we were younger, wanted to play guitar.
Yeah.
So I got a guitar. And then like around, right around high school would be when like the alternative explosion happened.
Right.
Like Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And with that came all this music that I had been just a little bit too young and too sheltered to get exposed to.
Right.
And so like for me, it was like hearing like industrial music.
Yeah.
Right. So I got exposed to that. And that was like it went from everything being like rock and roll to like suddenly like anything was possible. It was sort of like a tie-in back to the Pink Floyd thing where it was just like there's all this completely different style of sounds that can just be like fashioned into music, and sampling, which was not really like outside of hip hop, which was not mainstream at the time. Sampling was not really like liked a lot by like especially like a lot of my peers who were into like rock and metal and stuff like that. Synthesizers were not liked. Sequencing was not like hated drum machines.
Right.
I loved all of it. So that's kind of when I started to shift from like wanting to learn how to play guitar to like actual like production type stuff.
Right. Nice.
So saved up money from my first job and bought those two, synthesizer and a sampler for $350.
There you go.
They were very obsolete already.
Right.
And saved up some more and bought an Art SGE multi-effects processor, which is real. Like that seems so insane to me that you could chain all these different effects, and it had a pitch shifter on it. Made really cool. Like you could do awesome feedback loops with it. It's really cool.
Nice.
4-track, the old Tascam 421.
Yeah.
And
with the cassette recorder. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
I have one of those too.
Yeah. They're so good. I kind of miss it. They sound really cool. Those amps, the preamps in them sound really great when you overdrive them. It's like a really like interesting sound. Like everything I did was like that. It was just like running things too hot, distorting stuff, vocals through distortion, drum machines through distortion. Distortion on everything.
Was your fucking inspiration.
Right. Yeah. So my dad, again, like kind of saw that I was interested in this stuff, and he introduced me to a friend of his that was doing live sound.
Okay.
So Greg Burns was his name. So we started doing these, like my sister was in dance, so we would do these dance recitals every year.
Okay.
And we'd rent out this gymnasium at the local college. And, we'd start for a couple days ahead of time with, the scissor lifts and like hoisting up the, subs and the speakers. And like that was where I learned the difference between a sub and a full range and all this stuff. We'd set up a front of house tech booth in the back of the gymnasium. And then at that time, CD burners were still very rare and very expensive. Okay. So my job, they would do like something like 5 shows, and they were sort of different from night to night. And so my job was to operate the tape reel.
Okay.
And some nights you would have to like fast forward through a couple, songs and like watch the leader tape between the, so it was on a 1/4-inch tape machine. And then, there'd be a quick changeover between, shows and stuff, and I have to like put a new reel on, and there's like all these people in the bleachers behind me, 14-year-old kid like and then later I worked with him again. It was like my second job was working for an event production company, and we would do kind of the same thing up at City Walk, where there's a stage. They have a permanent stage there now, but at the time it was temporary. We'd go up there every week and set up, all the speakers, and I would run the lighting rig.
Lighting, nice.
Yeah. And I came to find that I didn't really like live sound. That much. Exactly. Especially this was in the monitor wedge era. Maybe this is just like the level of budget that I was running in, but like there were nobody had in-ears.
Right.
So it's a lot of monitor wedges, and like I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. And I also, you could never really get stuff sounding that great.
No. Yeah.
Especially then. It's so different now. I mean, technology for live sound is so great now. But so you gonna be okay there?
Yeah.
All right.
Your kitty is attacking my feet.
Yeah, he does that. He likes feet.
Okay.
Yeah. He's got a foot thing.
All good. Ow. Ow.
Okay.
All right. There we go.
So, did some more stuff. So Greg Burns really showed me a lot about what condenser mics were versus dynamic mics, and some of that really, really basic, what a cardioid pattern is.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. So he was like the front of house guy at the church, and they built a recording booth to record the services.
Right.
And they kind of brought me in and went like, here you go.
Right.
And I liked that way better.
Yeah.
My friend and I would sit there in this little isolated booth, like during the services, and, just total like Beavis and Butthead inside the booth. But I really enjoyed that better. And so, I was just I wanted to focus on recording. So it was time to do that. I somehow I got it in my head that O. Henry was the place to work.
Okay.
I don't remember how that was, but just the name O. Henry came up at some point, and that stuck in my head that was a place to go.
Yeah.
So I was looking for work, and I would get that Mix magazine that they'd have like the directory every year of studios. Yes. And I went down and looked at all the places that were close by in North Hollywood where I was staying, and would send resumes out to like a dozen places.
Did you go to recording school or no?
No, I did this brief period of like an internship with a guy that was really just like helping out a guy in his house kind of thing. And it was one of those like really classic, like exploitative, like relationships.
Of course.
Of course. A lot of like carrot dangling that, and never eating any carrots.
Yeah. But you got the experience to then...
That is an experience of its own. Right. That's also valuable. I learned things that I didn't think I was going to learn.
Right.
But, you're right. I learned a little bit about working in a DAW. And so I kept sending resumes out to O. Henry. I would send them a resume like every 2 or 3 months.
Right.
It took a while.
Yeah.
They keep saying, we don't need anybody.
Right.
Just we'll keep your resume on file.
Yeah.
And I'd send some again later, a couple months later, and I'd call to confirm you got it, because you'd fax a resume over in those days.
Yeah.
And one day I called, and it was, actually, we need somebody now. Can you come tomorrow? Like, we just lost somebody.
Right.
Somebody just left.
Nice.
Cool. So I went and I worked there as a runner for a year and a half or so before I started assisting.
Right.
Assisted there for a while. They closed. And then I was out of the business for maybe 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
It was just like, I didn't think I'd see the inside of a studio again. I was doing like content development for Yamaha.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
So I was doing a lot of like stuff for their home keyboard series and stuff. So, and I did some for Akai too. I like programmed some patterns on one of their drum machines. And
Nice.
did a lot of that stuff. That was like a really interesting musical education.
Nice.
So was out of the business, and then Wes called me.
Yeah. Because he worked at O'Henry, right?
Because he was a runner at O'Henry when I was assisting, and I was
right.
nice to him.
Yes.
So he called me.
He was working at Glenwood with me.
That's right. And they needed me to replace you because you were on a session.
That's right.
With Lyle Workman.
With Lyle, yeah, that's right. I forgot how
Billy
that
Bush.
all happened. Yeah,
that's right.
But it was like we needed someone right away.
Yep.
And
you had been on that session for like a week or two.
That's
and
right.
And then you needed to do something else. So that's where I met you.
Off of something
that's
else.
right.
Yeah.
So, so I came into that and was,
middle of the
session.
And I wasn't planning on having someone else take over.
So I didn't have someone take over. So you didn't have any notes, and that bit me really bad. But it took like a week to actually hurt, because like there was nothing to do for a week.
Right.
Everything was totally set up, and like these guys are going in and they would just do the same thing every day, and it was really great. And then suddenly one day we needed to set up a microphone for like a background vocalist. And Billy had all his like outboard gear, which is already intimidating, but like I didn't know the studio. I didn't have notes.
Never used the patch bay.
Never used the patch bay before, and it took really long.
I mean, I gave you a rundown. I said, hey, here's where this is plugged in. Here's that. All right, have a good time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't know how I didn't figure it out.
The extent of it.
So, that was, I thought it was over, and Bill,
I didn't realize you hadn't been, like, Wes was like, oh, yeah, I worked with them at O'Henry. I knew O'Henry closed a while before, but I didn't realize at the time you hadn't been set foot in the studio for years. That's at that point.
That's well, I mean, I don't know how long it was. It might not have been that long, but
but still, it had been a while.
Yeah,
and I was like,
sort of an interesting point to bring up is that there was this how I thought O'Henry was a place to go,
right?
And it really was. Like the reputation of that place was huge, and like Harold Kay, who ran the place, was amazing. Learned so much from him. The assistants were all incredible. The sessions that came in were all amazing, and it was just a really, really well run studio,
right?
And just the reputation of that, was so it just preceded me for a while.
No,
it kind of, like, to be completely honest now, was like a little bit beyond where my actual capabilities were. It was sort of like, oh, you were at Henry, and it was like I hadn't touched the patch bay in like 2.5 years or something like that, and especially didn't know my way around like Billy Bush's insane racks of Shadow Hills pre's and all this stuff.
But I remember that was the deal. Like, you came from O'Henry, so
that's right.
Like, in my mind, you were like miles beyond my level of it.
I wasn't.
Engineering. I
totally wasn't.
He's a total expert. Like, should know everything. Really cool. All right.
Which is not to say I didn't know anything.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I just I wasn't. The O'Henry thing really like helped me a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Nice.
But I think part of what that was there's just like a lot of determination to match what people were expecting of me.
Right.
So if that meant I had to stay overnight and sit in that control room for a couple hours after the session, after a 15-hour day,
right,
off the clock, and figure out how everything was hooked up,
Right.
then that's what I had to do.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Yeah, I mean that it really did turn out that O. Henry, like having worked there, was
Nice.
a really helpful big deal.
Right. So then you actually started at East West long before I did.
A little before you.
A little before, yeah. And
right.
then I came later.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know you were working there. And
That's right. We just
ran
saw
into
each other in the hall.
It's like,
Yeah.
what the hell?
I was like, oh, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I called Candace because the Yamaha thing ended.
Mm-hmm.
And what I knew that she was in need of, young man.
Kitty's doing backflips.
What I knew she needed, and this is something that I had just heard through the grapevine, was like they had this big room that they could do strings in, and they needed someone who knew how to do strings and orchestral
And you were
sessions.
the O. Henry guy.
That was
yet
a big
again.
thing from O. Henry,
Yeah.
which, it's like at that time, O. Henry was one of the premier independent places.
Yeah.
It wasn't a stage. Tadeo was gone, and Paramount was no longer there. So
That was a lot of big
a lot of big
productions and
places
films,
that
yeah.
have been there. Signet was gone.
That's right.
So there was this need for people who could work in like a room that handled up to 50 pieces, that could do what we used to call jingle sessions.
Right.
It's not really a thing so much anymore.
Right.
But, jingle sessions where you'd have like a 50-piece orchestra come in, and it wasn't on a stage, it wasn't union, or
Right.
at least I wasn't union.
Right.
But had that knowledge of how like everything needed to be set up and how the session needed to be run. And so my first day was a session with Damon.
Really? That was my first day at East West.
Really?
It was the 80 piece in Studio One.
That's
at
what
East
happened.
West.
That's exactly what happened to me. I was sitting
They
there
must have just we got to throw him in the fire.
That's
see
I
if
guess
it
what
works.
that's how Candace works,
yeah,
is like
yeah.
throw you in the fire, and you got to rise to the occasion. So
That's
it
awesome.
was an 80-piece orchestra,
Right.
a little bit too big for that room,
yeah.
And it had just booked that afternoon,
Right.
And they're coming in. It's like I used to have dreams about this exact, anxiety dreams about this exact scenario,
Right.
and I did that, and it worked,
Right.
And I was there for a long time, and then I went freelance,
Nice.
sticking with the scoring thing.
Yeah. So you've mostly been doing scoring. Have you been doing engineering, mixing? Kind of what have you been
All of
focusing
it,
on?
all of it, and
Right.
I like all of it.
Yeah.
I would have thought when I started going into this that I would have been more on the mixing and manipulation side. I liked bleeps and bloops and manipulation of
Right, all
sounds.
the
And I
industrial.
really would have thought that I'd be just like making
Right.
a lot of like crazy noises.
Right.
And then it became, about true capture of all these sources. So not just scoring, but, jazz, big band, folk
Right.
stuff, all kinds of music from around the world. I mean, I've recorded a lot of different
Right.
stuff.
Right.
It's everything. I
Nice.
like editing.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
editing is
yeah,
fun.
yeah. So a lot of what I talk about on the podcast is kind of how to inspire artists in the studio.
Right.
And as as someone that works with orchestras and
Right.
scoring stuff, like it's a little bit different in that sense because
It's very different.
it's it's all session players.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you're working more for the composer
Yep.
than the artist.
Yeah.
Because they sort of are the artist in
Right.
that sense. So how do you kind of prepare a session to make sure the composer is comfortable? And
Right.
also, I mean, it's
Sure.
kind of two questions here, but how does it differ when the composer is actually conducting versus sitting in the room with you?
Yeah.
And there's a conductor out
That's right.
there,
Right. Well, all of that starts beforehand.
Right.
Well before the session, and it's just all in communication and knowing what. Like most of my clients are seasoned pros.
Right.
Occasionally not, and that can be fun. Actually, I did do a thing for some scoring students recently from USC, and it's
Right.
actually kind of fun to sort of like help them along and help them learn
Right,
how
right.
to. So that's kind of one of those rare occasions where I do think a lot about comfort of the studio and how to make them feel at ease.
Right.
But mostly it's making sure that we're you know, on the same page about what we need to do, what the time frame is, what the instrumentation is,
of course,
what the layout of the room is going to be like. You know, usually we set up things and there's kind of a template for how you set up an orchestra, but occasionally it changes.
Yeah.
And, you know, you need to know if something needs to be isolated, what's being recorded together simultaneously. Are we striping?
right.
Is it multi-channel? Is it stereo? Or, you know, do we need to monitor in stereo versus multi-channel as we record?
And I really like how, well, you mentioned the layout of the room where, you know, when you record orchestras, it's one of the few sessions you go to where you literally set up the room how you want it to be panned.
Yes.
You know, because of the room mics.
That's right.
If you want the bass in the middle, you have to put the players in the middle of the room.
That's
and
right.
Arrange the chairs.
That's right.
You know, it's very interesting.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. How does that work when you're doing surround stuff? Obviously, you're not, you know, it's totally different. But
a lot of the surround stuff is ambience.
Right. I guess
you
so.
know,
Yeah.
it's like we all kind of do it when we first get to play with it. Is put some funky things like behind you,
in the back
but
of the room,
you know, it doesn't actually it doesn't really translate to that much of a listening experience usually. And when you do it, you want it to be something special that really grabs your ear.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's usually just ambient mics to get
just like
an
super high in the
immersive sort
corners,
of, you know, sound of the room.
And when the composer's on the podium conducting, it's like there has to be a level of trust between you and them.
That's right.
Because half the time they don't come in the room to actually listen to the recordings.
That's right.
There's not enough time.
There's not enough time.
So
that's a thing for people who don't know. Those sessions go really, really fast.
Right.
And time is extremely tight.
Yes.
Like I get a sheet usually at the beginning that's got every second of music to be recorded marked out.
Right.
When we would do something like The Simpsons, you know, a lot of those cues are only like 2 seconds long. You know,
Jesus.
But it adds so much. Like it was such a treat to like watch.
Right.
You'd get the video and you'd watch a little bit of the show as you're setting up without any music, and like how much of that actually adds to like it adds to the jokes. It adds to the sort. It completely adds emotional context to what you're seeing on screen, and you might not catch a joke without the music. The music is really like a big part of it in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But I guess like, leading to your question, I mean, that trust mostly gets built from working with people repeatedly. And you know, in a lot of those sessions, there's usually a really big team.
Right.
There's an orchestrator, there's, you know, a music supervisor, score readers. There's usually somebody else next to me.
Right.
Who's
triple checking
and making, you know, it's like, somebody's got to kind of know if, you know, maybe the first violins need to play out a little bit more.
Right.
Or it's, you know, I can catch that stuff really well, but sometimes an orchestrator or, you know, a composer might have a better idea of articulation. You know, and to me, I'm just trying to make sure we're getting a clean capture. And, you know, sometimes we record stuff down and it sounds great to me. And then they go, we could do that a little bit better. And you're thinking, that sounded amazing.
Right.
You know,
and then they play it.
And then they do it and you go, you know,
right.
What did you do? That's insane. Like it just elevates it so completely.
Exactly.
I mean, the trust is really built over a period of like working with people repeatedly.
Right. Of course.
And being prepared and it being clear that you're prepared when they walk in. That's a really big thing when they walk into that room, is seeing that you've got things under control and you're comfortable in your environment. And, you know, it took a while to get there where, you know, you can be comfortable in the control room and the client walks in and you like know everything's under control.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously those sessions are very high pressure sessions, you know, like
there's a lot of money on the line. Like every second, if something goes down for just a few seconds, people get really, really tense.
Yes, absolutely. Well, because literally, like, you know, I've been on smaller dates, even with like 30 or 40 people, and you know, there was a problem fortunately, it wasn't my fault where,
Yep.
you know, it was a copyist or something, they didn't have the music
That's right.
and they had to wait 30 minutes. We went
Yeah.
30 minutes
Right.
overtime.
Right.
And after the session, the producer comes in and is like, yeah, that 30 minutes just cost us 10 grand.
That's right.
You know, it's like,
right.
it's crazy.
And, well, and then like related to what we do,
Right.
there's a downward pressure of that. So
Right.
something can happen that wasn't your fault,
Right.
wasn't your responsibility, completely outside of your purview. This has nothing to do with you whatsoever.
Right.
But now it's really on
Yes.
you to not take even a fraction of a second
Yes.
too long to go into record,
Exactly.
to find the spot that, you know, there's a lot of communication. So on those sessions, there's really a very established hierarchy
Yeah.
of communication.
Right.
And especially like the most experienced and the best. There's a really clear so you really know what's going on at all times. You
Right.
just have to know who to pay attention to, who to listen to at any given time. It's not like a rock band where there's all these
Right.
like egos battling.
Yeah.
There are sometimes kind of under the
yeah,
surface, you
yeah.
know, it definitely happens on the
Right.
stages, but generally, you know I need to listen to the conductor. The conductor is
Right.
always telling us like what bar we're going to be in, like, you know, how many bars free we're going to be pre-rolling before and it's very easy.
Yeah.
Once you know.
Once you know the,
Once
the,
you know
the
how to follow
communication,
it.
absolutely.
It's just
Yeah.
it takes a while to get to know that.
And even like honestly, you know, if I'm running Pro Tools or something on a gig like that,
Right.
like even just having line of sight and
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, they
You gotta
say
be able to see the
they
conductor.
say, you know, okay, we're going to start at bar 28.
Yep.
And then just they raise their
That's right.
their thing and it's like once that happens,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah.
you
Nobody's
know,
asking if you're ready.
they're not,
Yeah,
they're still talking and making noise
right.
and the crew,
That's
it's
right.
like whatever. If he
You
raises
become
his
an extension of the conductor,
Absolutely.
like you're playing to the conductor as much
Exactly.
as the musicians
Yeah,
are.
absolutely.
It really, and kind of back to that downward pressure of you have to take on responsibility for things, even if they aren't necessarily
Right.
like your fault or your
yeah.
main responsibility.
Exactly.
It's really just to make sure everything flows and we get done on time.
And have you ever made a mistake that taught you a big lesson in the studio?
Once or twice.
Once or twice.
I mean, there's so many.
Yeah, of course.
You know,
Of course.
There's so many. It's hard to think of like a specific one, but in like the more grand scheme of things, I would say when things really shifted for me, this is maybe a bit more abstract than your question.
That's fine.
But I had to stop thinking so much about my own internal pressure of like, is everything working?
Right.
And start paying more attention to what everybody else was doing
Yeah.
and learning to have a good time and be relaxed. And to enjoy the company of the people I was working with.
Right.
You know, there was a period where I was just like too inward focused. There was just so much pressure to just make sure nothing broke.
Right.
Some of those sessions that we would do, you know, when you're not on a stage, you're not on an actual stage, you're taking on a lot of roles that on a stage would be handled by 3 or 4
Yes.
different people.
Yes.
You know, so you were up all night doing a hip hop session. It didn't get out till 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Now you've got to set up for an orchestra. Downbeats at 10. People are showing up at 9.
Yeah.
A guy's showing up with a drive at 8:30. You've got to prep. You know,
Yeah.
30 cues. You got to bring all the I/O in.
Yeah.
I mean, I made mistakes just on the I/O stuff a lot. You know,
Right,
it's like
right.
it's really easy to slip up on that stuff
Yeah.
when you're starting out.
Yeah. And then you made the mistake 30 times because you did all the cues wrong.
Yeah, and then you got to go back. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that's not really a direct answer, but
Still,
it's just like there was a big shift for me where I remember saying to myself, I got to learn to actually like enjoy this.
Right.
And people are asking me to be in this room, so they trust me, so I can trust myself with
Right.
what they've trusted me with. So let's relax on that. Obviously, I take the work seriously enough to make sure things get done. So, I'm not letting go of that
Right.
seriousness, but I need to learn to just like look up from the floor a little bit, pay attention to what's going on around the room, and listen to people and get to know people. You know, like there were times where I'd worked with people like 50 times and I didn't know their name because I was just so stressed out about making sure that something didn't break in the middle of a session or that I was running Pro Tools fast enough.
In the room, but
there was a lot of people in the room and they're talking about the basketball game and you're sitting there trying to listen to what bar,
exactly.
It's pretty hard, you know, and
it's crazy.
I mean, I guess that's not a direct answer, but
no,
that was a big shift.
Absolutely.
For me.
No, definitely. And when it comes to mixing, how do you, there's always like, the composer always has a vision for the project and artists as well. I mean, you've obviously done records as well.
Yep.
How do you kind of balance that between the composer's vision and your own interpretation of the mix?
Sure. Interesting question. Well, in a lot of cases, if we're doing a score for a TV show or film, there's usually a demo.
Right.
And that demo's been approved by directors and producers and stuff. So a lot of it, like, we don't want it to sound like the demo. Obviously, it's got to sound way, way, way better than that.
Right.
But you gotta start by getting everything there, and that's not necessarily a small task. That can take a whole day of just pulling all the, a modern score can have pieces coming from all these different places.
Right.
So we might record brass and woodwinds in a room and then get strings from another place and then get a guitar, guitars and banjos and all this stuff from a session player who's sending stuff into us, and then bass. This is a show I was doing where we would do a lot of this. It would take, a day of just pulling everything in. And then you got to do a lot of editing, even though these are the best players in the world. You got to glue it together, and you got to glue it to the common reference of the click. And there's pre-recorded, MIDI material. That's everything's got.
Well, they're not playing in the same room with watching the same conductor, so
it's like so different.
Even little things are swung or whatever.
That's right, and it's just a matter of like it's not to fix anything so much as it is to glue it together.
Right.
So you spend a lot of time doing that and just making sure you got something that matches that, and then from there you're making things sound a lot bigger and a lot more dramatic. There's a lot of input that comes from composers, and composers are really engineering savvy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I've mixed stuff for composers where you get back a note and they just want something down like a half a dB.
Right.
And I remember the first time getting a note like that and being like, "That's crazy," and then doing it and he was right. Like that oboe just needed to come down half a dB. It really just made that much of a difference. But they're right. Like, some are less, particular than that, but they have a lot of knowledge about, and listening to them and listening to what they want to do and not letting your ego get in the way while simultaneously they want you to bring your specialty to it. So you still got to do that. You don't want to just like listen to what they say and just copy the demo. You really want to make something special out of it.
Right.
And that's what they're asking you to do.
I've honestly found it sometimes can be more difficult to work with, artists or composers or whoever that are very experienced.
Yeah.
Because then you get a great sounding rough mix. They know exactly what they want. And it's like, well, how do I even make this better?
That's right. It can be intimidating sometimes when you get something before you started and you hear that reference for the first time and go,
right.
Oh, this actually already sounds pretty good. But then you get in the room with all the people and you start recording.
Yeah, of course, you pull up the mix. It's like, oh, right, okay. You can definitely, make a big difference. But sometimes when it's inexperienced people and the demo sounds like garbage and they know it and they don't want to keep, stick to the demo. It's like, great, I have full
everything you do
and
sounds a lot better.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Right. So it's much easier. I also want to touch briefly, we spoke about this before we started a little bit, but over the pandemic, everyone was working remotely, including all of the players.
That's right.
And you mentioned a few projects where, yes, it's one thing to record a band and have each person send in their own tracks.
Sure.
But when you're doing that with an orchestra, when you have 30 or 40 people that are all recording at home and sending in parts, I don't even want to know the challenging aspects of that.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And, when we started doing in-person sessions again, where do I begin with that? Like, there's such an emphasis on home recording now, which is great. Like,
Right.
I mean, like I was talking about the music that inspired me. A lot of that stuff was independently produced. Most of it was independently produced by people who were not musicians.
Yeah.
And, like,
Yeah.
were learning to produce and learning to engineer on their own and making these
Exactly.
like really radical sounding things by teaching themselves. So I really love that home recording aspect, but these musicians were so happy not to be doing like data management
Right.
when we came back, because you
Yeah.
got these like 60, 70-year-old,
Right.
brass players who've never had to record themselves in their home. A
Right.
lot of them do,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
many of them are very savvy, and you can talk
Right.
to them about microphones and Pro Tools and rooms, and a lot of them
Right,
know,
right.
but a lot of them don't. And just having to put like the title of the cue name in every file and what the instrument was,
Yeah.
and like all of this stuff was so much. It's a lot of work for me,
Right,
It's a lot of
right.
work for us,
Yeah.
And we have like macros and stuff that can do that to a point. But when we've been doing it for years, so we
Yes.
have muscle memory. It's very
Right,
fast. When we operate these things, we work very fast. It's not fast for a lot of these guys, and then. Yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of work just managing all that stuff coming in from different places,
Right.
different qualities of
Right.
recording. Most of it was fine, but, some people didn't have dedicated space, and, you could kind of hear that.
Right.
We often wanted like a close mic and a far mic.
Right.
Yes, you had two different microphones, and that far mic might be in a dining room or
Yeah,
something. And
yeah,
like
exactly.
it doesn't sound that great.
Helicopters flying over. and-
Yeah, right. And then that thing that we were talking about just now of like gluing all this stuff together.
Right.
Suddenly there's a lot more of that.
Of course.
And if you watch a conductor at like the Philharmonic versus a conductor on one of these sessions,
Right.
it seems like a totally different thing. There's no showmanship with the conductors.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I didn't really understand exactly what they were doing.
Right.
But they're so critical to everybody being on the same page, cutting off the notes at the same time, and
Yeah.
and balancing the instruments in the rooms so that what you're getting into the microphones is really a natural balance. It
Right.
sounds good, making sure that the trumpets aren't overwhelming the violins, or making
Yeah.
sure that the violins don't sound too harsh or are overwhelming the cello, or
Right,
the inside notes and all this stuff. And instead, you're getting all these things back that are each at different levels.
Right.
So some stuff's really hot and it's like close to peaking, and some stuff is really reasonable, and you've got to like move things, and it
Blend
just the amount of
everything,
time
right.
just so you can hear things at a
Right.
Then you got to edit each
Jeez.
single, like almost every single note
Right.
on every single instrument. If I'm editing an
Jeez.
orchestra that we recorded together, you're doing a lot of things
Holy
in
crap.
blocks. Right. But it's like,
Yeah.
I mentioned to you that this was one specific thing that did happen to me where, it's written on the score as eighth notes, but it was supposed to be swung.
Right.
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 And not everybody caught that.
Yeah.
But we have a deadline. You can't.
Right. Yeah. Still the same
if
deadlines.
you can,
and
you
same...
hit somebody back, but they might be on another gig or
Yeah.
something. You can't just
Exactly.
like, oh, hey, can you do this again and swing it? Like
Right.
it was sort of like, well, I've got to edit that now.
Yeah.
If you can, I could, thankfully.
Right.
But that was a
Jeez.
ton. That was just a ton of work.
Right. Right. With the same strict deadlines and the same.
The same strict. I mean, there was so much more work because
Right.
I mean, you also remember adding like Zoom to sessions
Yeah.
when we started doing in-person sessions, but we still had to be masked.
Jeez. Yeah.
I did a session at Fox, and we had like, there's like this person who's like from the Department of Weights and Measurements, measuring
Right.
out the distance between every player and
Jeez,
everyone,
the union
these
stuff.
these
Yeah.
people, well, like corporate, like the studios set their standards, and this person's there to make sure those are all
Right.
maintained. But
Jeez.
but it's so not musical anymore. It's like
Right.
each woodwind player has to be 8 feet apart, and there has to be plastic between each one. And you
God.
set up like a 35 piece, and it takes up this entire scoring
Right.
stage. It's made
Right.
for 120 players or something. And it's just
That's crazy.
but we were so happy to be playing back because so much of what we're used to is just being in the room together. And
Right.
that's
Right.
so exciting for us. And, you know, there's a little, we don't get to socialize much, but even these micro moments
Yeah,
of just,
absolutely.
you know, meeting, seeing the same people before the session and
Right.
hey, how's it going?
And that's also something I want to tie into is, you know, just the like obviously with orchestral stuff, you're always in the room together. It's always the
Yeah.
group. But when it comes to, you know, bands or artists or people making records,
Sure.
like so many people now do overdubs
Yeah.
and fine tune on the one thing. And there's nothing wrong
Sure.
with that.
No, I think it's great.
But there's also some magic to be had when you're in a room together with everyone and feeding off each other.
It's my
and-
favorite thing, and
Absolutely.
it's what drew me in. It's part of what drew me in to doing those kinds of sessions was
Right.
that there's really a magic to, you know, I'm not a sports guy,
Yeah.
but seeing a whole team
Yes.
operate as almost this like single organism,
Right.
and
Yeah.
everyone kind of knows their place and you know what to do and also knows when to call out. And you know some of the magic for me and a really teachable thing for me and what really excites me is like we were just talking about, you hear something go down and it sounds really great to you, and then somebody goes, I don't know, something I'm just like not feeling this section here, what can we do? And you know, conductor talks to the trumpet players, and then somebody else calls out, well, we can, you know, articulate it this
Right,
way.
right.
And then they just put in just that little tiny bit, and then it ends up under a wall of dialogue and sound effects. But, you know, I mean, that's
But
the joke, but it's so
yes.
important. It's still so important that we take that level
Absolutely.
of ownership as if
Yeah.
it's the most important thing at that moment.
Right, right. Well, partially because it gets buried by dialogue and sound effects, it's like it has to be the
Right.
best it possibly can be. Because
That's right.
It's will get lost completely.
That's
otherwise.
totally true.
Yeah,
That's totally true. Well, and also it's just like we're there because we care about this so much.
Of course,
and
of course.
you know, every project you do, you want to bring something special to. You don't want it just, oh well, this is just a cartoon.
right.
You know, I was doing a big part of my work was a cartoon that I was doing, and it was a Mickey Mouse cartoon. I
Nice.
was doing that for a number of years, and you know, that was broadcast in 34 languages in 109 different
Right.
countries.
Right.
And one of the most interesting aspects of it was you could follow the narrative without speaking the language. Like you didn't even
Right.
have to have the dialogue on at
Right,
all.
because the music was such an
Understand
important part.
exactly what the story was, and you know every element of that show, every
Right.
single person was putting in their 100% best.
Right.
First, you know, what we might think of as a silly cartoon for kids, but it
Well-
shows, and you know, it was the shows were really well liked,
Right,
and
right.
you know, what really well received, and
That's another thing that I have never even thought of until this moment is, you know, when movies first started, when moving pictures first started,
Yeah.
there was no dialogue at all. It was only music.
it was only music. That's right.
So the music told the
That's
entire
right.
story.
That's right.
So it's like that's why
That's right.
music is such a big part, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you can tell the entire story with just the music.
You really can.
So it's interesting. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free snare guide. In it, I go over all my techniques, from drum choices, microphone placement, tuning, even mixing techniques. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/huge snare. And now, back to the show. So what are some current or recent projects that you're allowed to talk about, if possible?
I mean, you know, it's just, I got a couple of commercials that I did recently. There's a lot more stuff this year. We were talking about the strikes, so there's been a
yes.
lot less happening this
Right.
year in terms of what I'm used to doing. So there's been a
Right.
lot more filling in with
Well, before the strikes, what
records
were some of
and
those
records. You know,
films?
I was doing Nick Phoenix's record.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of library stuff. Like a lot of composers are just wanting to like kind of do some more library work or
Right,
like
right.
toolboxes. You know, sometimes we'll do our custom sample libraries
Right,
just for
right.
composers. So
Nice.
you know, I was recently getting to do one, record a whole bunch of very strange weird instruments, just, just for textures and stuff that's not commercially available. That's probably most of what I can talk about.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Awesome. As you know, I like to kind of wrap up each podcast with the same.
You're done already?
Same few questions.
Yeah.
Not quite done.
Okay.
Few questions. The first one is, who has been your most influential teacher? It could be a few.
Yeah, there's like a lot of those. I mentioned Greg Burns. I mean, that was really big. That was just like learning to do things, simple things like neatly coiling microphones at the base of a stand, because we were doing live sound.
Right.
And I brought a lot of that forward to the O. Henry sessions and scoring sessions where there were, we were setting up for an actual show. So it's showtime at X o'clock.
Right.
That helped a lot when I started setting up for actual sessions. Was it's showtime at 10 o'clock, so things have to be, and it's got to look neat, so when people walk in, they feel like they're not walking into a war zone. He was big. Dan Wallen.
Okay.
When I first started doing more scoring sessions out of O. Henry, like he was really, he really likes to talk a lot about what he was like, just the overall idea of just a true capture and what was the best way to capture stuff. He had a great phrase, intermodulation.
Okay.
Right? What we often call phasing, which is sort of like a BS term. It's not really like things aren't phasing.
Right.
But just hearing that term, like I think that's like the best, most accurate term for it. And like learning that when you got a room full of microphones up, you got 40 microphones up in a room or more.
Right.
Learning how those are interacting with each other and how to prevent them from interacting with each other in negative ways. And just overall attitude. Yeah, he was important. I learned a lot from working with Bob Rock. I did a lot of sessions with him at East West. I just loved his attitude. I think what I love, he just loved music.
Right.
And, I think you've probably experienced working with some of these like successful producers who just
working with him.
So, sure. But you work with people who are jaded.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It happens. It's really easy when you do this like 14, 15, 16, 20 hours a day for years on end. Like you get jaded. Yeah. Kind of almost tired of music in general.
Right.
Bob just had a love for music, and he had a love for getting like the right people in the room together and interacting and, being surprised by what they come up with. I just sort of really liked working with him a lot. Ed Cherney.
Yeah. Of course.
Greg Townley on the mixing side.
Yeah.
Really showed me a lot, and also brought me like kind of crossed over from what seemed like a huge room, East West Studio One.
Right.
To a scoring stage, that's really a huge room.
Yes.
Giant, just a massive, massive room. But beyond those people, I'm trying to learn from everyone that's in the room all the time.
Right.
So I'm always trying to pay attention to what the composers are saying, what the composers are talking about, what the orchestrators and the conductors are talking about, what the musicians are talking about. I love hearing them talk about music. I had some music theory background when I tried to learn guitar.
Okay.
But hearing them get really into those finer details makes me appreciate music more and appreciate the craft that they bring to it so much more. And I think like knowing about music is such a critical, there's so much more than just the fancy equipment and the monetary value of the microphones or how special the microphones are or any of that stuff is just, it's cliche to talk about. It's brought up all the time, but there's so much that's just in the performance and the song and the arrangement that really like is what makes it special. And what we're doing is just trying to capture that in a way that best communicates
absolutely
the artistic intention. Yeah. So I'm trying to listen to those people all the time because that's how you learn about what artistic intention is.
Exactly.
And you can think a lot, and you'll hear somebody talk about something that's like pretty deep, and learn a lot from that.
Definitely. Awesome. Next question is, what is your favorite reference track if you have to go to a new studio, kind of learn the room?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. Yeah. And I still don't have like a great answer.
That's okay.
It's like not.
Not everyone does. It's okay.
Excuse me. Well, the truth is, it's not a big part of what I'm working in familiar rooms a lot now.
Right. Of course.
Right. Like typically I'm working in rooms that I know at this point. So it's not a frequent part of what I need to do. I don't need to go in a room and like find the bottom end and stuff.
Yes.
But, excuse me, I do like to, I might put on something like, I might put on like a Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds thing with, if we're doing like a rock record, that's a good thing. That's like a capture of people playing in a room, and it's kind of wild, but it can sound really good. Maybe some Depeche Mode or Massive Attack or something for like electronic punch or a score, but oftentimes when I'm putting on, to be honest with you, the very first thing I need to hear is like the references for what I'm working on today.
Right.
And I guess maybe like kind of leading to what you're asking or why you're asking that question is listening to like the transient response of the speakers in that room. The first thing I want to know is everything working?
Yes.
Is anything out of phase? Exactly. It's like the very first question.
Are the speakers hooked up backwards?
Are the speakers hooked up backwards? Like is left and right correct?
Yes.
If I put things on these two channels, do they come up equal?
Right.
But then, if it is a new room, I do want to kind of listen to, where the sweet spot is, where I'm out of the sweet spot. I'm out of the sweet spot a lot when I'm working because I'm on a big console or in a big control room, and there's a lot, the pre's might be way over here. I got to change things over here. Exactly. Sometimes the credenza's way over there, and I got to adjust a compressor, and I'm like way far away from the speakers,
Exactly.
It's like not ideal.
How do you adjust that when you're...
But you like, I want to know how punchy the speakers are. I want to know like what kind of like the frequency response of the speakers is. And I kind of want to know if there's like dead spots, if I put on something with some bottom end, like a Massive Attack or, Nick Cave or something like that. I want to hear like, not just something with like 808 bottom end, but something with a moving bass line. Right. So you can kind of hear their dead notes. Yeah. Kind of walk around the room and feel if there's spots where like it comes out more than others.
Right. Absolutely.
Sometimes like the sweet spot at the console is slipping back from the console a little bit. You kind of want to know that. But all of that really, like for me, tends to happen really, really fast. Like I don't come in and put on AC/DC and spend 20 minutes listening. Like
obviously orchestral sessions, you don't have that luxury most of the time.
So, I mean, there was a time where like when I started assisting, people were still mixing on consoles.
Yes.
So it was really common for somebody to come in and put on some references and figure out the room and figure out the speakers and, kind of, but that's not really part of the workflow anymore.
Right. That's true. Well, now you've made it clear I need to change my questions at the end.
No, it's a great question. It really is a great question.
But it's true, though. It's not really, like, I've had more people answer, be like, yeah, I don't do that. Like...
It was such a common thing when I started out. Like, like I have to say, things were so different when I started out. When I started out, when I first got that runner job, it was only a few weeks after that Quantigy shut down and stopped making tape for a period of time. And there was still a lot of like unsettled question as to whether like people were going to record in Pro Tools. A lot of people wanted it to be Logic or Radar or
the radar system. Yes, I use that.
There were a lot of people that wanted to use Radar because they felt it sounded better and
more like
tape. And it was kind of a confusing time. So things have changed a lot since then.
Definitely. Last question.
Yeah.
What would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
Is this for...
Let's say for someone that wants to get into scoring in particular.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to ask if it's for people who want to be engineers like professionally or if it's people who just want to learn how to record in general.
No,
like
someone that wants...
music. Someone who wants to be an engineer.
For film scoring.
For film and scoring. Well, what you can't avoid if you're going to, like specifically with scoring, you're going to have to work under somebody.
Right.
Because, you're just going to have to you got to find someone. You call it a mentor, but sometimes you don't get the luxury of an actual mentorship relationship, and it's just a matter of being like, you got to be useful.
Yeah.
You really got to be useful and open. God, making it specific, it's almost harder for me to answer that question. But
well, maybe not specific then. Yeah. Well,
easier, I think what's so critical is just being like open-minded, keeping your eyes and ears open, and being useful. And there's a sort of character trait that's like built into engineering culture, which is just sort of like surly know-it-all like thing, and it sucks.
It does
like
suck.
Like we're sort of like, we've started to move away from that a little bit. You'll see a lot on the forums and stuff, though, like, and whatever. But it's not to get into that, but I just think having a more open attitude towards everything, you can learn a lot more. Like I was saying, I did not expect to be moving into like the scoring side of things, or capturing things really clean, getting asked to record symbolisms and things like that, and trying to get like the cleanest capture. I thought that I would be turning knobs and distorting stuff all the time, and it's really like a lot more about good mic technique for me now, and rooms and stuff, and a lot of people together in the room, which I never expected. But that happened because I was open. I mean, it also happened because somebody needed me to do it. But you got to be useful to people. Like, it's really easy when you're starting out. You just want so badly to be like at the end game already.
Yes.
But it doesn't. It's just life. It's not. It's not this business. It's just life. You got to go through a period of like kind of figuring out how to get to that end game, and your end game might change. So I think an openness. Learn a lot about music.
Right. For sure. Awesome.
Know as much about music as you can, because like so much of what we do, there's a lot of technical aspect, but you have to serve the music all the time. So we've all heard records that don't really sound that great, but are just amazing.
Yes. Yes.
And if you just like learn to lean in with what you've got and serve the song and the artist as best you can.
Absolutely.
And I think the way to get there is to kind of the way I got there was to be an observer.
Right.
And to be an observer, I had to be useful and do things that were outside of my end game for a while.
Right. Nice. Sweet, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe for all the updates, and I'll see you next week.